Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Tricia Miller, Hank, and all the wonderful folks at camera for putting together this evening and for inviting me to participate. I also want to thank Jeffrey Feld from the Jewish Federation of Greater Naples for hosting this event. The need to get messages of truth out there has never been greater, and the stakes have never been higher. You know, there was once a symposium attended by 1,000 people that featured a panel of 5 presenters. Each speaker was given 10 minutes. The first speaker gets up and talks for 45 minutes, half the room leaves. The next one gets up, speaks for an hour, another 300 people leave. The next one keeps droning on and on and on until everybody leaves. Everybody except for one holdout in the front row. This guy is hanging in to the very end. The speaker finally finishes. He jumps off the stage, runs over to the one remaining listener and says, "Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. You must have really been captivated and inspired by what I had to say." To which the guy says, "What are you talking about? I'm the 5th speaker." My dear friends, at our last camera event, I was the 5th speaker. I want to thank the coordinators for putting me on first tonight. But they've given me also 30 minutes, no less, so I ask you, please make sure to stay on for Tricia's speech. Our topic this evening is the Jewish holiday of Purim. More specifically, genocide, resistance, celebration, in the words of Esther. So there's this dark joke Jews often tell, not without a touch of irony and sarcasm. It goes something like this. Every Jewish holiday can be summed up as follows. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. Perhaps on a very shallow and cursory level, it may seem that way, but the truth is that each of our holidays has its own unique history and significance, customs and tradition. The holiday of Purim is no exception. The main observance of Purim holiday is to hear the formal reading of the Megillah, the scroll of Esther, or it's called Megillah for short. The word Megillah literally means a scroll, and it usually refers to a long and involved story, which the story of Esther certainly is. And now for some show and tell. This is a scroll, an authentic Megillah of Esther, a scroll of Esther, handwritten letter by a qualified scribe using quill and ink on a specially prepared parchment, which is made out of the skin of a kosher animal. The person that's reading the Megillah does so from this handwritten scroll. Now, while many of you may be familiar with the basic story of Esther, for the benefit of those who may not be, I'll provide a very brief summary, after which I will expand on certain aspects of the story when addressing this evening's topic. I want to mention, Alan mentioned that we'll be having you spin your graggers when the name Haman is mentioned. But actually, the Chabad custom is to not boo or spin the grogger every time the name Haman is mentioned. Rather, it's mentioned only when Haman's name is mentioned together with certain adjectives, such as Haman the wicked. So I suggest that since we have only until 9 o'clock, we do a similar thing, that we only spin the grabber when you hear the name Haman the wicked. All right, story of Purim in a nutshell. Ancient Persia, 4th century BCE, in the capital city of Shushan, the very powerful King Ahasuerus held a lavish banquet where he commanded his wife, Queen Vashti, to appear before his guests. Vashti refused, and as a result, she was executed. To find a new queen, a search was conducted throughout the kingdom, and a Jewish girl named Esther was chosen for her elegance, beauty, and grace. Esther was the cousin and adoptive daughter of Mordecai, who was the leader at the time, and all this time Esther kept her Jewish identity a secret. Meanwhile, a notorious Jew hater and opportunist named Haman. No, I did this specifically because I'm speaking for 30 minutes. I want you to listen very clearly whether I'm saying Haman or Haman the wicked. Unlike everyone else in the king's court, the Megillah states, and I'll use the Hebrew words, Mordechai lo yikra v'lo yishtachaveh. Mordechai refused to bend his knee and bow before Haman the wicked. This infuriated Haman. No? Good? You do it, you're going out. Prompting him to accelerate his long-standing plan of having every Jewish man, woman, or child in the empire exterminated. Telling the king that there was a certain people in the kingdom who lived differently than everyone else and were thus not worth keeping around. Haman asked the king's permission to deal with this problem. The king allowed Haman to issue any decree he wished, giving him unrestrained power. Haman the wicked used that power to dispatch a royal decree commanding the authorities of all the provinces in the Persian Empire, all 127 provinces, to annihilate all of its Jews on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Upon learning of this decree, Mordecai urged Esther to approach the king, reveal her identity, and advocate on behalf of her people. Esther was reluctant. She said, I cannot do this. After all, Ahasuerus had not called for her in a very long time, and appearing before the king without having been summoned was a capital crime. But after Mordecai made a very compelling argument, Esther agreed to approach the king on the condition that Mordecai gathered together the Jews of Shushan and convinced them to spend 3 days fasting and praying for her success, and she would do the same. On the third day, Esther made a fateful appearance before the king, who was overcome with affection toward her. At the feast with Haman and Ahasuerus, she explained that she and her people had been condemned to death by a genocidal plan. When the king demanded to know who was behind this diabolical plot, Esther pointed across the table. This despicable enemy and tyrant, Haman the wicked. A furious King Ahasuerus had Haman executed on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. He then authorized Mordecai and Esther to issue a new decree granting the Jewish people across the entire kingdom the right to bear arms, to fight back against those still seeking to go ahead with the massacres. The Jews rose up against the would-be assassins, vanquishing them completely. In the words of Megillah, "V'nafochu asher yishletu haYehudim," everything was reversed. Almost overnight, the victims became the victors. Mordecai established the holiday of Purim as a joyous occasion for all time, symbolizing the triumph of good over evil and the salvation of the Jewish people. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Cliff Notes version of the story of Esther, or the Twitter version. 60 words less. Tragically, Jewish history is replete with many Hamans. As we recite at the Passover Seder, in every generation, there are those who rise against us to annihilate us. But the Holy One, blessed be He, rescues us from their hands. From the Egyptians to the Amalekites, the Greeks to the Babylonians, from Haman to Hitler, Hamas to Hezbollah. The names, faces, and places of our oppressors may change from one century to the next, but the insidious agenda remains the same: to persecute, if not totally annihilate, the Jewish people. My friends, make no mistake about it. The savage attacks that took place in Israel on October 7, 2023, Simchas Torah, was not about land. It was not about statehood or settling old scores. It was not even about the plight of the Palestinians. No. The systemic rape, torture, kidnapping, murder of innocent men, women, and children, and the glee with which it was carried out was about sheer hatred. It was about the extermination of a people who in the killer's eyes are less than human, whose very existence is a curse that must be expunged. We know our history. We know a Haman when we see one. We know that if Iran and its proxies, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and all the rest could only have their way, they would continue to launch such massacres until every Jew was eliminated, not just from the river to the sea in the Middle East, but from anywhere on the face of the earth. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza Strip completely, giving the Palestinians full control of their own destiny, a perfect opportunity to show the world exactly how they would act if they would have a state of their own. Well, show us they did. They elected Hamas, who instead of directing the billions and billions of dollars in aid being sent into Gaza for the purpose of securing a better quality of life for its people, invested it in building hundreds upon hundreds of miles of underground tunnels. They invested in rockets and bombs, guns and grenades, hiding them in hospitals, schools, mosques, private homes, and yes, those underground tunnels, the purpose of those weapons and bunkers, as they have stated and continue to state openly, to kill all the Yehuds. If we didn't believe them before October 7th, we had better believe them now. After the Holocaust, we pledged never again. Back then, the Jewish people were decimated and stateless. We didn't have an army, a navy, an air force, or any power of our own to back up our pledge. Well, today we do have that power, and as such, we've not only the right, but the obligation to use it. We must demonstrate that never again is not just a slogan, but a plan of action. Look, Mordechai and Esther and the Jews of Persia were merciful people, not warmongers. They were not keen on fighting or killing. But they knew that if you don't mount a strong and effective response to those with genocidal plans and intentions, they will pounce on that weakness and vulnerability and continue to bring darkness, death, and destruction upon the whole world. They understood the Talmudic adage, which I remember learning in yeshiva, I didn't really understand it then. It states, those who are merciful toward the cruel will end up being cruel toward the most merciful. Mordechai and Esther did not entertain talks of a ceasefire until the enemy fully surrendered. In fact, the Megillah tells us that after victory was achieved in the territories, there were still enemy strongholds holding out in the city of Shushan. When Esther asked the king if they could extend the war until those remaining pockets were rooted and destroyed, he said, absolutely, don't stop now. Likewise, Israel's objective in this war, the total elimination of Hamas, is essential. Yes, we all want this war to end. We yearn and desire for peace. 3 times a day, Oseh Shalom, Sim Shalom. From the suffering of the hostages and their families to the loss of so many soldiers, to the thousands of Palestinians caught in the crossfire. It is horrific. So yes, the war should end. But it should end with nothing less than the unconditional surrender of its perpetrators. Instead of constantly pressuring Israel, the world's pressure should be placed on Hamas to force its capitulation. Why is that not happening? Because everyone knows the Hamas could care less about the plight of the Palestinian people. If they truly cared about the suffering of those innocent civilians, they would surrender today instead of continuing to use them as human shields. They would release the hostages today. Bring them home. Enough already. Dayenu. Lay down their arms. Come out from under their holes in the ground and surrender. But they don't care, so they won't surrender. A premature ceasefire that would allow Hamas to regroup, resupply, and live to fight another day would help nobody. It would only invite more October 7th style massacres, God forbid, and more bloody wars in the future. It would be immoral and disrespectful to all the casualties to date on both sides, because it would only leave the door wide open for things to keep happening again and again. No decent person or country wants war. But in a world where evil exists, sometimes, unfortunately, just and righteous wars must be waged. It is tragic, but true. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed by the military actions taken by America and the Allied forces against Nazi Germany during World War II. Yet no morally sane person would accuse the Allies of having committed genocide. It was only the other side, and only the other side, that had committed genocide. The Allies did what had to be done to stop the genocide and save humanity. Israel's current actions are no different. People who are honest and are equipped with a healthy moral compass understand this very well. History has shown us time and again that Israel and the Jewish people are the proverbial canaries in the coal mine. Attacks that start with the Jews never end with the Jews. Eventually, the genocidal maniacs turn their hate and terror toward others as well, as evidenced, unfortunately, by the attacks of September 11. As evidenced by the aggressive moves Iran is making against America as I speak and I stand here at this podium. As it is on the precipice of developing nuclear weapons, Iran is coming for the entire civilized world. And Israel is out there right now, on the front lines, not just for itself, but for all life-cherishing and peace-loving people on this planet. We need to give a thank you to the Holy Land of Israel. That is why it is so painful and shocking to behold the way so many in the Western countries around the world have turned on Israel and the Jewish people in the wake of October 7th. The bodies in southern Israel had not yet been counted, let alone identified. Israel had not even gone into Gaza yet. There were already mass demonstrations vilifying Israel as the aggressor and the oppressor. Some of those protesters and detractors, to give them the benefit of the doubt, are just useful pawns for Israel's enemies. Well-meaning, but totally ignorant of the history of Israel and the facts relating to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And totally naive when it comes to the nature of good versus evil. Others, including many Jews, are so consumed with their political fortunes or warped agendas that they will sell their very souls to advance them. To them I say, shame on you. As for the rest, the lies and vitriol being aimed at Israel are nothing but a disguise for an age-old sickness called anti-Semitism. Whereas before it was perhaps tucked away in the darkness of their souls, the attacks on the Jewish state have somehow given it a license to crawl out into the open in all of its ugly news. According to the ADL, anti-Semitic incidents in the United States have risen by 400% since October 7th. Especially in the college campuses where Jewish students are constantly being intimidated, harassed, and even assaulted. But also in public squares, in the houses of government, at Jewish places of business and ownership, and of course on the social media platforms. Why? Why such loathing toward a group that has given so much to the world in so many fields? Why would the people who introduced the world to the concepts of monotheism, liberty, equality, the sanctity of life, and the dignity of a human being in the image of God as stated in Genesis, B'Tselem Elokim Asasa Adam, why would they be hunted and hated by so many people around the world. Why? Perhaps those questions answer themselves. Maybe they hate us because we represent those things. Of course, there are countless theories on the subject, but the general consensus is that throughout history, Jews have served both as humanity's conscience and its convenient scapegoat. Whatever anger or misery some may be feeling at any given point in time, they project it on the Jews. In other words, anti-Semitism says a lot more about the haters than it does about the Jews. But we only have till 9 o'clock, so I'm going to stop here. How should we respond to these latest onslaughts of hate? Let us go back to the story of Esther. Remember when I picked up the Megillah? Shall we? Back then, the Jews were assimilating to a large extent into the Persian culture, often hiding, if not completely dropping, any and outward expression of their Jewishness. They were feeling safe and secure, protected and accepted by the society around them. After all, one of their own, Mordechai, had a position in the king's court, no less. They had a man in the White House. Suddenly, Haman the wicked brought that sense of security crashing down. After all, to the anti-Semites, it doesn't matter whether you're religious or not, whether you identify as a Jew or not. Neither Haman nor Hitler discriminated that way. If you were Jewish, you were in their crosshairs. You can run, but you can't hide. In the words of Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel, an anti-Semite is someone who hated me before I was born. It was a rude awakening for the Jews of Persia. Not so safe and secure after all. So how did they react to the threat? Instead of continuing to distance themselves from their Judaism and trying to hide even further, they did exactly the opposite. As counterintuitive as it may seem, they stood up loudly and proudly to identify themselves as Jews in total defiance of Haman and its decree. They recognized that if their lives were to be spared, if the Jewish people were to survive as a nation, it would require divine intervention. And so they came out by the thousands to join with Mordechai and pouring their hearts to the Almighty, praying for forgiveness, for deliverance, and for miracles. They reconnected to their roots and rededicated themselves to their Jewish heritage and tradition. Rather than run and hide, Esther and the Jews of Persia not only acknowledged their Jewishness, but they doubled down on it. Similarly, I believe, the events of October 7, 2023 and their aftermath have served as a huge wake-up call for Jews around the world, prompting many to say, we will not stay silent or invisible any longer. In fact, many who previously referred to themselves as a quiet American Jew are now exploring their Jewish roots and proudly proclaiming their Jewish identity. I can't tell you how many people call me up and say, Rabbi Fishel, I'd like to learn more about my heritage. I'd like to come more to Shabbat services, put on tefillin, and so on and so forth, like the Shabbat candles. And that, my friends, is exactly the right response. For if hatred of ignorance and terrorism were to succeed in making us ashamed of who we are, it would mean the triumph of evil over goodness, and we cannot allow that. Our response must be not less but more Jewish pride, more performance of mitzvahs, more statements of truth of who we are, what we stand for. This will inspire the world and empower our fellow Jews and in Israel the world over. Attending rallies, hanging flags, and wearing pins are a good start. But we should also seek to add more light to the world through the performance of mitzvahs. As I mentioned, let us not underestimate the power of such actions of lighting the Shabbat candles Friday night as the sun sets. Take the time together with your family. Take a moment to pray to God, pray for the world. Welcome the Shabbat Queen, putting on tefillin, studying Torah, and celebrating Shabbat and other holidays. And let us all understand that anti-Semitism is not just a threat to Jews, but to democracy and decency. Authoritarians and despots love to use anti-Semitism as a tool to get their fire started. First they come for the Jews, but eventually they come for everyone who doesn't toe the line and think as they do. That is why all clear-thinking and peace-loving Americans who are blessed to live in this greatest country on God's green earth, God bless the United States of America. A country founded on the fundamental principles of faith and freedom, truth and fairness, must not hesitate to stand tall and proud in defense of the Judeo-Christian values that have made this country the beacon of light it has been for nearly 250 years. That is so special about this evening together. Let's give you all a round of applause. At a time when so many of those values are under assault from so many different directions, we must strengthen our resolve, our devotion, and our patriotism. We must increase in our acts of love and kindness toward one another. And let me say this. Despite all of the evil, negativity, hate, and cruelty we hear so much about these days, and what I was speaking about for the last few minutes. Was it a few minutes? It felt like just a number. We should not lose sight of all the goodness, positivity, light, love, and kindness that's out there as well, because there's so much of it. The recent uptick in anti-Semitism notwithstanding, we should know that that is not where most of the country is. A recent Pew survey found that more Americans view Jews favorably than unfavorably. It's just that the haters tend to make a lot more noise and get more attention than the lovers. Let's spin our groggers for that. Let's hear it. My point is, for all the doom and gloom, division and strife out there, there's nonetheless cause for hope and optimism. As the holiday of Purim teaches us, no matter how dreadful or terrifying things may get, they can always turn around on a dime. But if it's going to happen, it will be due to the efforts of people of faith and good moral standing who believe in truths greater than themselves. That faith is the antidote to fear. Just look at this wonderful gathering here tonight. It's amazing. Christians and Jews standing together, coming together to hear and to apply the words of Esther. Speaking of celebrations, I want to take this opportunity to make sure that you all celebrate the upcoming holiday of Purim, which is going to be Saturday night and Sunday. If you don't have a celebration yet to attend, I heard of this wonderful place called the world-famous Chabad of Naples. No pressure. Where you can hear the Megillah and then have some delicious kosher food and great entertainment for adults and children of all ages. And you can come with a costume if you're inclined to. But I see Hank Benima holding up the sign. It's almost 3 minutes left, so I will shorten it right now. But we're not counting the grogger time when they spin the grogger. So we have another 5 minutes. I'd like to conclude with one final powerful lesson from the book of Esther. Specifically, I'd like to revisit the conversation Mordechai had with Esther when asking her to intercede with King Ahasuerus on behalf of the Jews. Esther initially expressed her reluctance, and for good reason. At which point, Mordechai tells her the following, and I quote, "If you remain silent at this time, relief and rescue will come to the Jews from somewhere else, but you will be lost. And who knows if it was precisely for a situation like this that you were appointed to this position of royalty. In other words, Jewish survival is a given. Someone will be God's agent for saving the day. Whether that someone will be you, Esther, or someone else, that's your choice to make. You think that you just lucked out to be chosen as the queen of Persia? No, it's not what happened. God put you in this situation for exactly this moment. Seize it. You will achieve immortality. If you decline it, you will fade into anonymity. As Mordechai says, you will be lost. Of course, Esther steps up and makes it clear that she will not evade the challenge or defer it to someone else. She takes the necessary actions to bring the miraculous salvation of Israel, and the rest is history. Esther seizes her moment. My friends, we all have our Esther moments. In whatever circumstances we find ourselves, we must realize that God put us there because there's something we are uniquely qualified to accomplish in those particular circumstances. You here, you're in Naples, Florida, to go to the beach? No, God has placed you here in this particular circumstance. If you listen closely enough, perhaps we can hear God saying, it is for this challenge that you are here in this place at this time. Will you rise to the occasion and seize your moment? I believe that the people in this room understand this very well. That we each have our own unique gifts, talents, resources, and abilities with which to combat all the deception and manipulation out there. That's what camera does so beautifully. Let's give them a round of applause. But couldn't only give a round of applause for camera. The question that I have for us today is, will we do it? Will we stand up and be counted? Or just leave it for the other to do it? Comedian Lily Tomlin had a great line. She said, I love it. I always wonder why somebody doesn't do something about it. Then I realized I was somebody. Esther realized just at the right moment that she was that somebody. Perhaps this is our moment to realize that we are somebodies too. So let us roll up our sleeves and get involved. Let us do whatever we can to advance the truth in whatever form we can. Let us continue to support Israel and to demand the release of the long-suffering hostages. Bring them home today. Let us seize our moment to make a difference. God needs us. Israel needs us. America needs us. History itself needs us. To quote from the Megillah, "V'hayamim ha'ela nizkarim v'nasim." These days shall be remembered and instituted in every generation. For the book of Esther is not just a story about events transpired 2,400 years ago. Its lessons live on today and for all time. Just look at all those mighty empires or despots who persecuted the Jews and in the process brought so much death and destruction upon the world. Where are they today? Gone. Relegated to the ash heaps of history in infamy and disgrace, yet the Jewish people keep defying the odds, outliving them all. And so shall it be with the Hamans and evil forces of our days. What do you say we demonstrate where their memories are headed? Sinwar of Hamas. They're all headed to those same ash heaps because at the end of the day, evil is not real. Like darkness, it is just the absence of light and has no enduring substance or reality of its own. Goodness, on the other hand, is truth. Truth is real. Truth is light. Truth is eternal. And as such, we may rest assured of one unchangeable and indisputable fact of history. Am Yisrael Chai. The nation of Israel lives on today and forever. Thank you.